our lead prosecution attorney. She's been with mock trial for 4 years. She was originally a witness, a very interesting witness.
Yeah.
Yes, a very slippery witness her freshman year. And then she has been an attorney for the last 3 years, one of our team captains. And so what she's going to do is give you her closing argument. The case is a labor trafficking case. And so to give a brief summary here is that we have a character named Lynn Stark. Lynn Stark is from the country of Tantera, which I'm sure you all have heard of. Right? Yes, and so Lynn Stark was hired. Arielle will disagree with me, but Lynn Stark was brought in order to work in the kitchen of the Taste of Tantera for Cameron Aubrey. And Cameron Aubrey, the defendant, is not a particularly nice boss or a good boss. And so sorry, I shouldn't be prejudicing the jury. But so anyway, Arielle is going to give for you her closing argument, which is really the climax of the trial. And Dr. Cron has graciously been volunteered to play the role of Cameron Aubrey to sit here as the defendant and be prosecuted. And one last thing in terms of why I'm wearing the hat. This is the year of the Pritzker. Glenn Pritzker, who was the heart and soul of Tory mock trial. He tragically passed away over the summer, or right as the school year began. And he is very much in our hearts in every way. And the GP here is, we're doing this season very much for him. They, in fact, over at the beach ball tournament, they named an award, the Most Outstanding Coach Award after Glenn, which they're going to be giving away every year to a coach of some fantastic California team. So very exciting and everything, but so this is for Glenn.
Go TMT.
You don't need this.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be protecting. The defendant wanted his business to succeed at all costs, but it was Lynn Stark who paid the price. It cost Miss Stark her freedom. What started off as employment soon became enslavement. Your Honor, the defendant is guilty of count 1, human trafficking, count 2, false imprisonment. The defendant violated Miss Stark's personal liberty through force, fraud, and coercion in order to get her to provide services. Now, Your Honor, we're not saying that the defendant set out to traffic Miss Stark. He may have wanted to start a business, but from the get-go, as Julian Blake described to you today, the defendant had the mindset of exploitation, of wanting to treat people like property. So when he realized he was in over his head, he tightened his grip on Miss Stark, more and more until she could hardly breathe. First, he started paying her less, working her more. Then the threats started. He made Miss Stark afraid to leave the building. He took her legal documents, stole her key, and locked her away on March 9th. That's when Miss Stark's job turned into her jail. Force, fraud, coercion. Proving any one shows that there is human trafficking going on in this case. That's what separates a bad boss from a criminal. From the get-go, the defendant demanded that Miss Stark hand over her visa and passport, and for 4 months, he never gave them back. Your Honor, possessing immigration paperwork is a form of duress outlined in Calcrum 1243. The defendant didn't need these papers to begin with. He was paying Miss Stark under the table, didn't need to fill out any employment paperwork. But these papers were Miss Stark's only hope. Without them, she couldn't quit. She couldn't leave her job. She couldn't even go visit her dying sister. Force. That's why the defendant took those documents. And that's why he banned Miss Stark from leaving the building, even to run errands. In fact, in the 4 months that Miss Stark worked for the defendant, she only saw the light of day 4 times. Now let's do some math here. The defendant was paying Miss Stark about $400 a month, 6 days a week of work, 15 hours a day. That calculates down to about $1.08 an hour. all for the promise that maybe one day the defendant would help Miss Stark's family. But that was a promise he never made good on. Fraud. Now, Your Honor, you can hear the coercion in the defendant's words. To Julian Blake. Yeah, I admire my boss at the garment factory. He got a lot out of foreign workers for very little cost. You know, that dead-bolted door right there might be useful just in case I want to lock something away. To Officer West. Everything under my roof is mine. To Lynn Stark, his victim. Would anyone miss you if you were gone? Well, if you don't like the way I'm treating you, you can go back to Tantera. You'd better get comfortable, because it's going to be a long time before you get out. And when the threats and abuse didn't work, the defendant decided to lock Miss Stark behind that dead-bolted door on March 9th. That evening, he went up into her apartment when he knew she was working and stole her key. Now, this isn't about a leaky faucet. For 3 months, the defendant never fixed that faucet. And Frankie Lyman, the defense's own witness, told you that the defendant didn't have any tools in his hands to fix a faucet as he was coming out of that stairwell. It was about power and control. Miss Stark was restless. She was helpless. She wanted to leave. And the defendant was desperate to make her stay. So when Miss Stark asked for a few days to go say goodbye to her dying sister, the defendant shut her behind that door. He knew she would be locked in. He knew it was a fire hazard, but he didn't care. That was no accident. It was not reasonable. It was false imprisonment. Now, let's talk reasonable. Reasonable employers don't target immigrants and withhold their legal papers from them. Reasonable employers pay their workers a minimum wage for 40 hours of work a week. In a job interview, a reasonable employer might ask, what are your greatest strengths and weaknesses? Not, would anyone miss you if you were gone? When a worker asks for a few days to say goodbye to a dying relative, a reasonable employer says, yes, what can I do to be of help? They don't lock their employee up all night like a caged animal. Now, according to Calcrum 224, you must reject unreasonable conclusions. And nothing the defendant has done in these 4 months can be explained reasonably. This goes beyond being a bad boss. What started off as employment became enslavement, and a job turned into a jail. And that's why we ask for a guilty verdict on both counts. Thank you.